Welcome to LexTalks Legal Topics Simplified, where we make learning law engaging and accessible.
I like that.
Today, we're diving deep into biodiversity conservation law in India.
All right.
Specifically, we're going to unpack the Biological Diversity Act of 2002.
Sounds good.
Now, this act has been at the heart of some really fascinating legal battles.
Oh, absolutely.
And to help break it all down, I've got an expert in the field joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so let's start with the basics.
Okay.
For our listeners out there, many of whom are law students,
Right.
what exactly is biodiversity?
Biodiversity.
And why should we care about conserving it,
Yeah, that's a great question.
especially in a legal context?
Well, biodiversity is essentially the incredible variety of life we have on Earth. So we're talking everything from, those tiny little microorganisms all the way up to the big whales,
Oh, wow.
the whole spectrum.
The whole shebang.
Yeah, and it's absolutely vital for healthy ecosystems.
Right.
And when we talk about conserving it, we're really talking about protecting this entire web of life
Okay.
and, making sure that it's sustainable for the future.
So it's not just about, protecting individual species.
No.
It's more about maintaining that balance in the ecosystem.
Exactly. It's about the bigger picture,
Oh, I see.
It's about those connections between all living things.
And that's where the law comes in, I guess.
Absolutely.
Because without legal frameworks like the Biodiversity Act, there's no real teeth to enforce responsible use of these resources.
Right. You need that structure. You need those rules.
Exactly.
And think about it. India is one of the world's mega diverse countries.
That's right.
I mean, we're talking about a huge proportion of global biodiversity is right here.
Oh, wow.
We've got it all.
Yeah.
Coastlines, mountains, deserts, rainforests,
They got it all.
incredible variety.
Yeah, it's really amazing to think about all the different life that exists just in India.
Absolutely.
But for us, thinking like law students,
Yeah.
what makes India's biodiversity so legally relevant?
Okay, so legally speaking,
Yeah.
India is considered one of the Pavlovian centers of origin for cultivated plants.
What does that mean?
It means that a huge chunk of the world's food crops
Oh, wow.
were first domesticated right here in India.
Really?
Yeah, and as a law student focusing on biodiversity conservation,
Yeah.
this is huge because it really highlights the legal complexities around things like ownership and use of genetic resources.
Oh, I see.
So think about this for a second.
Yeah.
Let's say there's a plant that originates in India,
Okay.
and some company in another country develops, a commercially valuable product from it.
Yeah,
How do we make sure that the benefits are shared fairly?
that's a good point.
Right. So you can see how the legal aspects go way beyond just, protecting endangered species.
It gets really complicated.
It does. It touches upon things like intellectual property rights,
Oh, right.
international agreements,
Yeah.
and even the rights of indigenous communities.
It's like a broad spectrum.
It's a huge field.
Okay, so we've established that India has this incredible biodiversity.
We have.
But what are the threats to it?
Mm.
What are some of the challenges that India is facing when it comes to protecting this natural heritage?
So sadly, India's biodiversity is under a lot of pressure right now.
In what way?
Well, one major issue is habitat destruction.
Okay.
Development projects are essential
Of
for
course.
economic growth,
Yeah.
but they often come at a cost.
Right.
So I'm talking about things like dams, highways, mining operations.
Always very important.
Essential, yeah.
Yeah.
But they can really fragment and destroying natural habitats.
And I imagine unsustainable practices also play a role.
Oh, absolutely. You're right.
Yeah.
Overexploitation of resources is a huge problem.
Like overfishing.
Like overfishing, exactly.
Taking too much.
When we take too much from an ecosystem, it throws things out of balance.
Okay.
And it prevents natural replenishment.
Makes sense.
And then there are things like unsustainable agricultural practices. Excessive pesticide use, for example,
Yeah.
that can really harm biodiversity by, depleting soil fertility,
Right.
harming beneficial insects,
Yeah.
impacting entire ecosystems.
It's all connected.
It is. It's all connected.
So it's no wonder that India needed this robust legal framework,
Right.
like the Biodiversity Act,
Exactly.
to try and address these complex issues.
It was absolutely necessary.
And that's where the 2002 Act comes in.
That's right.
And it's designed to regulate access to biological resources,
Mm-hmm.
ensure equitable benefit sharing,
Yes,
and conserve India's rich biodiversity for future generations.
that's the goal.
Now, you mentioned earlier a three-tiered structure.
I did.
Can you kind of dive into that for us?
Yeah.
How does the Act approach this massive task
Yeah.
of managing and protecting biodiversity across such a vast and diverse country?
Well, it's a fascinating approach.
Okay.
The Act sets up a National Biodiversity Authority
Okay.
at the national level, of course.
At the top.
Then we have state biodiversity boards
Okay.
in each state,
Right.
and then biodiversity management committees at the local level.
Local level.
So think of it as a collaborative effort,
Okay.
with each level playing a distinct role in making sure the Act's objectives are met.
So it's not just a top-down approach.
No, it's not just the big guys calling the shots.
Right.
It recognizes the importance of involving local communities.
Okay, that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Local communities, they often have a really deep understanding of their environment
They do.
and the resources.
They're the ones who live it every day.
Yeah.
And by empowering those communities through the Biodiversity Management Committees, or BMCs,
Okay, BMCs.
the Act acknowledges that traditional knowledge is important for conservation.
Right?
So for a law student like you,
Yeah.
understanding the role of these BMCs
Yeah.
and how they work with local communities,
Okay.
that's key to understanding how the Act is actually applied on the ground.
So we've got this three-tiered structure.
Mm-hmm.
At the heart of it are these BMCs. What kinds of powers and functions do they actually have under the Act? What's their day-to-day involvement like?
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So imagine you're a member of a BMC.
Okay.
You're probably deeply rooted in your community.
Right.
You understand the local ecosystem probably better than anyone.
Yeah, that's true.
Your role is multifaceted.
Okay.
First, you're helping to create something called a People's Biodiversity Register.
A People's Biodiversity Register.
Yeah, basically a detailed record of the local biodiversity.
Right.
We're talking plants, animals, traditional knowledge.
Wow.
You name it.
Everything.
It's a really vital tool
Yeah.
for understanding and managing resources.
Sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is.
How do they even begin to compile all that information?
It's a community effort.
Okay.
The BMCs work with local people,
Okay.
elders, farmers,
No.
anyone who can contribute
Yeah.
to gather knowledge that's often been passed down for generations.
Oh, wow.
They document the uses of various species.
Traditional medicinal practices,
Mm-hmm.
even the cultural significance of different plants and animals.
That's incredible.
And for you as a law student,
Yeah.
this is a perfect example of how traditional knowledge is recognized
Right.
and integrated into a legal framework.
So it's not just about, like, the hard science.
No.
It's about the cultural aspects as well.
It's about the human element,
Yeah,
the intersection of law culture and ecological knowledge.
I like that.
It's fascinating.
Okay, so they've got this register.
Right.
Now what?
What happens next?
Yeah, how does it actually help with conservation?
Well, the People's Biodiversity Register is like the foundation for decision-making.
Okay.
Let's say a company wants to access a particular plant
Yeah.
for research or commercial purposes.
Okay.
The BMC would consult the register
Okay.
to understand the plant's ecological importance,
Right.
its cultural significance,
Mhm.
any traditional uses,
Okay.
and all of this information is crucial.
In determining whether to grant access and under what conditions.
So the BMCs have real power.
They do.
They're not just passive observers.
No, they're guardians of their local biodiversity.
Okay.
They make sure its use is sustainable
Right.
and that the benefits are shared fairly.
I see.
They can even charge fees for access.
Really?
And those funds go back into conservation efforts within the community.
Wow, so they have a financial stake in it too.
Exactly. They have a vested interest in protecting their resources.
Now, I'm curious about this benefit sharing.
Yeah,
It's a key principle of the Act.
it is.
But what does it look like in practice?
So benefit sharing can take many forms.
Okay.
It could be monetary compensation for communities,
Okay.
royalties from the commercial use of a resource,
Right.
or even non-monetary benefits.
Good question.
Things like capacity building programs
Right.
or technology transfer.
Interesting.
The key is that communities receive a fair share
Yeah.
of any benefits derived from their biological resources and traditional knowledge.
So like if a company develops a drug
Yeah.
based on a plant that's traditionally used by a community,
Right.
that community should benefit from the drug's success.
That's the idea.
Got it.
It's about recognizing that traditional knowledge has value
Right.
and making sure communities aren't exploited.
Yeah,
Of course, the specifics of these agreements can get quite complex,
I bet.
and they often involve negotiation and legal expertise.
I can imagine.
It's a whole field in itself.
Okay, so benefit sharing sounds great in theory,
Right.
but I'm sure there are challenges.
There are always challenges.
Yeah, implementing a law like this across such a vast country.
Mm-hmm. It's got to be difficult.
What are some of the major obstacles that the BMCs face?
So one of the biggest challenges is a lack of awareness and capacity building.
Okay.
Many BMC members are from rural communities.
Yeah.
They may not have the technical expertise or legal knowledge
Right.
to really understand the act.
Okay.
So they need training and support.
To do their jobs effectively.
Exactly.
So it's not enough to just have the law.
No, the law is just words on paper.
You need to empower people.
You need to give them the tools.
Really?
What other challenges are there?
Yeah. What else?
Funding is always an issue.
Of course.
BMCs often lack the financial resources
Okay.
to conduct thorough biodiversity surveys.
Right.
Or to monitor and enforce regulations.
It all takes money.
And then there's the whole issue of coordination.
Okay.
So you've got multiple agencies involved at different levels.
Yeah, the National Biodiversity Authority.
The state biodiversity boards.
Local governments.
Exactly.
There's a lot of players.
It is. And ensuring smooth communication and collaboration between all of them.
Yeah.
That can be tricky.
Sounds like it could lead to conflict.
It can, if everyone isn't on the same page.
Right.
And then you've got the challenge of balancing development with conservation.
Ah, yes, that age-old dilemma.
India is a rapidly developing country.
That's true.
We need infrastructure.
The economy.
Right. But these projects often impact biodiversity.
Okay.
So it's up to the BMCs to make sure that development is done sustainably.
That's a tough job.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
So they're dealing with local issues, but also national priorities.
It's all connected.
It's a demanding role.
It is.
But it's an important one.
Absolutely.
BMCs play a vital role in biodiversity conservation in India.
They're the ones on the ground.
The boots on the ground.
Making it happen.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But let's move into some of the heavier legal stuff.
All right.
Because the Biodiversity Act, it's not just about setting up committees.
Right.
It's about the law.
Exactly.
It has specific provisions related to regulating access to these resources and ensuring benefit sharing.
Very important.
What are some of the key sections that every law student should be familiar with?
Ah, yes, the legal nitty-gritty.
Let's get into it.
This is where it gets real. So we were talking about the legal nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the nitty-gritty.
Where do we even begin?
So much to cover.
Well, for law students, it's crucial
to
understand those provisions about access and benefit sharing.
Yeah, those are key.
Okay, so let's jump right into Section 3.
Okay, Section 3.
This section basically says who needs to get permission
Okay.
before they can access biological resources.
Okay.
You know, for research or commercial use.
So there's a process.
Yeah, there's a system in place.
Okay, so who needs to get permission?
Section 3 is pretty clear about that.
Lay it on me.
It says anyone who's not a citizen of India
Okay.
or any company that's not registered here needs to get approval from the National Biodiversity Authority before they can access any biological resource.
So foreign researchers,
Even companies.
they have to go through the MBA.
They do.
What about Indian citizens or companies?
They might need approval too,
Okay.
but at the state level.
Oh, so it's different.
Yeah. Section 4 covers that.
Section 4.
It says if an Indian citizen or company wants to use biological resources for commercial purposes, they need to get permission from the State Biodiversity Board.
So different levels of approval.
Depends who's asking.
Makes sense.
Okay.
So let's say you've gotten approval.
You've got your permission slip.
Does that mean you can just exploit the resource however you want?
Oh, no, no, no. There are rules. There are definitely rules.
Okay.
The Act has provisions in place to ensure that any use of these resources is sustainable.
Okay.
And that benefits are shared equitably.
That's important.
So, for example, Section 21.
Section 21.
That's all about benefit sharing agreements.
Okay.
It says anyone accessing biological resources has to enter into an agreement with the National Biodiversity Authority or the State Biodiversity Board.
It depends.
It depends on the situation, but the agreement outlines how benefits will be shared.
With local community.
With the people who are actually connected to the resources.
So these agreements are pretty important.
They're crucial.
To protect the rights of these communities.
Absolutely.
Make sure they get a fair deal.
That's the goal.
Okay, so what kind of things are covered in these agreements?
Well, they usually include things like monetary benefits.
Okay, money.
Technology transfer.
Okay.
Joint ownership of intellectual property rights.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes even capacity building programs for the community.
So it's not just about handing over cash.
No, it's about empowering communities.
Yeah.
Giving them the tools and knowledge.
It's a more holistic approach.
Exactly.
So we've got all these legal mechanisms in place.
We do.
Now, for our law students out there, what are some of the landmark cases
the case law
that have shaped how we interpret this act.
Well, there have been some really interesting decisions
Oh, yeah.
that have helped clarify things.
Give us an example.
One case that comes to mind
Okay.
involves the Connie tribe.
The Connie tribe.
And the development of a drug.
A drug.
Called Giovanni.
Okay.
And this drug was developed from a plant that the tribe had traditionally used.
I see.
And the case highlighted the importance of recognizing traditional knowledge.
Right.
Protecting it.
Yeah.
And making sure that any benefits derived from that knowledge are shared equitably.
So this case really showed
It did.
that the act isn't just about,
Plants and animals. It's about people, too.
Yeah, about communities.
And their knowledge systems.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive here,
Yeah.
what's one key takeaway?
All right, one key takeaway.
Especially for those who are interested in environmental law.
Okay, so the Biodiversity Act.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic piece of legislation.
Okay.
It's constantly evolving
Right.
through judicial interpretation,
Okay.
practical implementation.
So for law students,
You got to stay updated.
keep learning.
Understand how the Act connects with other areas of law.
Okay, so it's not just an isolated thing.
No, it's all connected.
Intellectual property rights,
International agreements.
even human rights.
It all ties in.
It's a lot to think about,
It is.
but it's fascinating.
It really is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been a pleasure.
This has been incredibly insightful.
Glad to hear it.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for being a part of LexTalks.
Keep learning.
Subscribe and stay informed.